Hello everybody and welcome back to our third episode, I think it is, in our Polizioteschi season here at the Wild Wild podcast. I am joined as ever by the hugely talented and immensely prolific Rod. Hello, Rod.
Hello, Adrian. I don't know about the talented part, but yeah, I do seem to be on more podcasts than I need to be on, yeah.
Yeah, and you can't stop making your own either. It's like it's a compulsion.
Oh, I know. It's ridiculous. I've got a couple in the can right now to release. It's insane.
Yes, and you've done a couple of Italian films recently, and I've been so snowed under with everything I've been doing that I haven't quite got round to tweeting those out yet on the Wild Wild podcast feed, but I will. But I have seen that you did one on Beyond Darkness, or is it Beyond the Darkness?
It's Beyond Darkness. It's
Darkness.
There's a film called Beyond the Darkness, and there's Beyond Darkness. They're very different films.
Yes.
One does not involve, shall we say, sex with a dead body. So yeah. Yeah.
Which, funnily enough, I wrote the sleeve notes for that one for the Blu-ray. in the UK release of that lovely film, so I'm going to try and sneak it in somewhere in the podcast eventually.
Oh my goodness!
So yours was the film that's basically like Troll 3, effectively.
Yeah, same people who made Troll 3, Troll 2. You could just call it Troll 3 to a large degree because it's assembled from various pieces and parts of other films that you've already seen, like, Poltergeist and everything else under the sun. And it's mostly shot where Fulci shot The Beyond. And
oh, okay. But with the same cast from Utah that he...
No.
Or the same kid, is it?
The kid is the same. The kid actor who went on to make the documentary about Troll 2 called Best Worst Movie. But no, not
not the dentist.
Not the dentist. Like I say, there's a couple of actors that carry over from Troll 2, but not all of them. Yeah,
I have got that. I've got, again, like so many other things, I've got the Blu-ray, but I haven't watched it yet. So I'm looking forward to checking that out. I'm saving the podcast until I've actually watched the movie in case, there's any major spoilers.
That's probably a good idea just for enjoyment's sake. Yeah.
Not sure how much you can spoil a film like that. You also did one. I'm assuming it's because of the recent 4K and Blu-ray release. You did an episode on Flesh for Frankenstein.
Yeah. The release of the two Paul Morrissey Frankenstein and Dracula films recently on Blu-ray over here have made it. It made it easier than it has been for a few years to actually see the things. And my companion in crime, Mark Maddox, wanted to talk about them because he has an interesting history with both of them, as do I, actually. Now that I cast my mind back on the podcast itself. But yeah, he wanted to talk about Flesh for Frank. So we're doing them in order: Flesh for Frankenstein first, and then in a month or two we'll do Blood for Dracula.
Excellent. And I mean, what a world we live in. What an age, the golden age we live in when films like that get 4K and Blu-ray releases. Films that haven't been available in any kind of decent version for decades.
There are so many things that have come out and are continuing to be announced that I never assumed we would even see, not just decent versions of, but my goodness, we're getting high definition, super special edition versions of these things. I do occasionally just kind of shake my head and I'm stunned. Don't get me wrong, very happy, but at the same time, wow, the age we live in is filled with wonders and terrors, isn't it?
Yeah, where's it all going to end? Um, yeah, do you have a 4K TV? Are
The
you just
TV is
watching the
4K. I
Blu-ray?
have not bought a. I've not. I'm just. I just have Blu-ray players. I don't have a.
Yeah,
I have not upgraded to the 4K players because, quite honestly, I can't think down that road. What's the point?
well, I mean, I thought that about Blu-ray, and then look where I ended up. So I've got a sneaking suspicion that I will eventually. I mean, I haven't got 4K player or TV or anything yet, but I feel like it's just inevitable.
Well, I
I
mean,
will crack eventually.
it may be. I mean, I wasn't setting out to buy a 4K TV when I bought the television that I currently have. It's just that we had moved, and it was time to buy a new television, and that was I got a really good deal on the TV that I got, and then I realized, oh, okay, well it's 4K. It says it every time I turn it on. Okay, well, that's
Yeah,
nice,
yeah. No, but it is good to be able to see these films looking better than ever. Sometimes they look too good, even just in Blu-ray. So I was watching this morning. I was watching Mill of the Stone Women
Yeah.
on the Arrow player because I was trying out Arrow player, and it looks great. They've done a great restoration on it. But in one shot, you could see they had a woman on a trolley, pushing her along ready for her operation, and you could see her tetanus jab scar on her arm,
Yes.
which most people have, but they wouldn't have had in whenever that film is supposed to be happening. Uh, like I don't know when I can't quite tell when that film is set, late 1800s or something.
Something like that. Well,
Um,
people have talked about that kind of thing forever and ever. About
yeah,
you'll be able to spot someone's fillings and their
yeah,
teeth in a period piece, and it's like, why? I mean, it doesn't have to break the reality for you.
no, it's kind of part of the charm, really.
Well, no, it's not that. It's like, that's probably you could look at that and realize, that's. You could just say that those are teeth that are rotting currently. I mean,
Yes,
those don't have to
exactly.
be what you know they are.
Exactly. There was also a wide shot because the whole film was shot at Cinecittà, but they've got a couple of kind of establishing shots that have
Uh-huh.
gone to Amsterdam to film. And there's a wide shot of Amsterdam with the canal, but in the distance you can see cars driving down the road. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure that those aren't the right kind of cars. Even if this was like very early 1900s, the cars didn't look like that. But anyway.
Probably
And you
not.
probably wouldn't have noticed that if I'd been watching it on an old ropey VHS. But anyway, speaking of, this is a nice segue here. Ready for this? Speaking of restorations,
Oh yes.
this brings us a not very good segue. This brings us to our film that we're going to look at today, Cani arrabbiati, or Rabid Dogs, from Mario Bava. Now I chose this um, because the films that I picked are kind of going in a sort of vaguely chronological order. But technically speaking, this film was not released until a good, 25 years after it was actually shot. But it was
That's
made
true. Yeah.
in the summer of 1974 or 75.
I believe
So
74. Yeah.
yeah, so it fits in with the time period where we're at. But this is a film with a very interesting history, which we'll try and get into a little bit. I don't fully understand it, even though I've been reading from two different books about it over the weekend. I still don't quite. I haven't managed to completely untangle it all in my head. But yeah, so Rabid Dog. So Rod, what is your sort of history with this film? Were you aware of this being a lost movie? Because I know you go back a lot more than I do when it comes to cult film knowledge. My cult film knowledge has only started to develop relatively recently, whereas I know you've been sort of cult film basically since you were born. So I'm sort of assuming that you must have been aware of this movie back when it wasn't available.
I was aware of it mainly because I was an avid reader of Video Watchdog in the 90s.
There you go.
And because of that, I was aware of the film. I was aware of the film's existence, but it wasn't until it came out. Of course, I'm the same as everyone. It wasn't until it came out on that initial DVD offering in the late 90s that I was ever able to see it. And of course, I mean, you couldn't have seen it until then. I mean, it was it was physically impossible.
Yeah.
But and it was actually that Rabid Dogs DVD. That was the very first DVD I ever bought.
Oh wow, really?
Yeah.
One of the things I read about it, that they said it was like the first film to only come out on DVD, apparently, because people were still mainly using VHS in those days.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Well,
so,
it's what caused me to buy a DVD player. I bought the
Wow.
DVD before I had a player.
There you go. And that was under the title Semaforo, rosso, or red light.
Well, as I remember it, it was kind of
red light stop, or
yeah. As I remember it, both of them, both titles were on the packaging, as it were. So you kind of knew that it was a question of, as with most European films from that period, what's the title? I don't know. What country are you in?
yeah.
And so it became a very exciting thing to be able to finally see this movie after it being completely invisible since it was shot.
I mean, it's amazing. A lost Mario Bava film.
Exactly.
I mean, for you people because in the 90s I'd never even heard of Video Watchdog. So for you guys who had read that and obviously were aware of the sort of scholarship that was developing around Bava, the idea of there being a lost Bava film that's suddenly uncovered, that must have been so exciting.
Well, it was, and it was strange because it was not a typical Bava film by any stretch of the imagination. This film is an example of Bava breaking out and kind of moving sideways into a genre that he had previously not been much a part of. As a matter of fact, almost no part of, which is the Italian crime explosion of the 70s. He had been, primarily, if you're a Bava fan, you know this. He'd been primarily a maker of horror films to one degree or another, either suspense or crime films. He's one of the fathers of the giallo genre and supernatural ghost stories of all types, of course. The occasional, science fiction thing like Planet of the Vampires, and strangely enough, even something as odd. I mean, the closest thing to something that Bava had done before to this would have been the very cartoonish, intentionally so, Danger Diabolic, which is probably my favorite Bava film of all time. Mainly because he brought such a wonderful sensibility to it and was able to create a glorious adventure film on screen. And this is very much similar in that it's about crime and criminals, but it is incredibly different in almost every other way.
Yeah, no, it's such an impressive piece of work, and as I think Tim Lucas points out, it's like when you look at the film, it looks like the work of a much younger man than the man who made it. He was 61 when he was shooting this, but it's got such energy and such pace. And the shooting was just so cramped and so hot and sweaty that it looks like, and it's so sort of vulgar and horrific that it feels like the kind of film that would have been shot by somebody much younger. So Bava had just had a big trial with Lisa and the Devil, which had not really taken off at all, and he'd been forced to remake it as House of Exorcism, which had been a pretty disappointing experience. And then, but then he'd found this short story called, hang on, I've got
Man and Boy.
Actually, Man and Boy. They reprinted it in the DVD, the Blu-ray booklet, called. Oh, I was hoping it had the Italian name. Never mind, I read that somewhere else. But I think it's like L'uomo e la bambini or something like that. Anyway, Man and Boy, and it's a fascinating little story. It's only like 3 pages long, but it's really interesting to read that story and actually see whole lines of dialogue completely lifted that they put into the film. The film, despite obviously having to pad this 3-page story out to an hour and a half, it really sticks very well with the content of the story. Would you like to? Well, I don't know. Should we talk about the plot first? Let's talk about some of the people first.
Okay, let's talk about Let's
Bava. We've done Bava at least 2 or 3 times before now, so we don't need to talk too much about Bava other than to say, I guess this was towards the end of his career, and things were slowing down, and obviously having a lot of sort of disappointment. I think in fact he
Yeah.
only made one more. He only made one more theatrical feature after this, I think, which was Shock, wasn't it?
Correct. Yeah. And even with Shock, he did that Italian director thing of officially handing it off to his son so that his son could get credit as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they said this was the last film that he solely directed. Lamberto Bava was an assistant director on this, but after this, with the projects that he did after this one, he was kind of, Lamberto Bava was co-director, I think. So the cast are quite interesting. So first of all, we've already mentioned, we've hinted towards Joe D'Amato a few minutes ago. So we've got George Eastman, aka Luigi Montefiore, who's got such a. I mean, he looked huge. There are moments in this film where he just looks like he's towering over everyone else.
Well, I mean, it helps that in reality he was 6.5 feet tall. So
yeah, he's really intimidating presence. But obviously, in terms of cult film, he has got such an amazing career as a writer, as an actor. He's directed as well, including a post-apocalypse film. He made that really crazy film. And have you ever seen Dog Lay Afternoon or Bestialita? Do you know that film?
I have not. No.
He directed that. I've seen bits of it. It basically starts with a scene of a girl coming home from school to find her mum is having sex with a dog. And then,
oh my goodness.
And then the dad comes in and sees what's going on and then drags the mum out of the house and sets fire to the house, killing the dog. And that's just before the credits.
Holy crap.
I know. Yeah, so he directed that. So he's a pretty interesting guy. Obviously acted in tons of films.
Yes.
But he's perhaps best known in sort of cult film circles for his work with Joe D'Amato. And I've read about him that often he basically would just do any film that was given to him because he had a gambling habit. And so was spending money faster than he could earn it, which might explain some of the films he ended up in.
It probably does.
But I mean, but some great one. Obviously, we're grateful to him for doing those kind of films.
Oh, I certainly am. I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah.
As I was a fan of him, he was someone whose face you knew. If you were a Eurocult nut, searching your way through bootlegs of whatever weird film came down the pike, he became a face that you became very happy to see whenever he would pop up in a movie. I mean, we can talk all day long about Anthropophagus or Porno Holocaust or the Bronx Warriors or whatever, whichever film you want to talk about him being in, but the fact that as soon as you see him, you know that there's at least something in the movie that you're probably going to end up enjoying. He's one of those people. And then
and there's all the westerns as well.
Oh yeah, so many spaghetti westerns, but he became much more easy to spot once you get into the 70s and after the spaghetti western had begun to wane quite a bit, and so what I generally associate him with are those later movies. But it was a real shock to find out that he was also a script writer, because I'd been a fan of his for, I'd say, 5 or 6 years before I ever learned, and by the way, he wrote a lot of films too. And so that's when I found out, he was involved in writing Keoma and things like Redcoats, which is also known as Cormac of the Mounties, which is another Joe D'Amato film, and Great Alligator River.
He wrote Stage Fright.
Yeah.
And also, I'm just looking on the IMDb. Apparently, he plays the killer when he's got the mask on.
Which is what you do. But he's just one of those things where he wrote, and he wrote these bizarre little Joe D'Amato things like Absurd, which I'm never going to hold up and pretend it's a great movie, but at the same time, he's also the monster in the film, just like he was in Anthropophagus, and it's one of those things where It was years before I found out that one of the reasons why he probably moved into doing that is it was just another income stream. He just needed more money. I'd love to know more. I mean, I've seen a lot of interviews with him, and he clearly was good at coming up with scenarios and kind of going back and forth with directors looking for subjects that they want to make films about. And it kind of shows up in the things that he made, because they always seem very collaborative. There's a buy-in from the people that are behind the camera on these things that it's kind of in evidence. These are not things where somebody presented a director with a script and said, okay, you need to go make this. These are things that are done in collaboration and not just after the fact. And that can be seen by the fact that Eastman will be, like you say, with Stage Fright, he was sometimes playing the masked killer. And that means, hey, if we need somebody to do something to the script, we've got him right here, so it's good.
Yeah, and he you can see this with so many Italian filmmakers. Like, once the bottom fell out of the kind of lower budget film market in the late 80s, they all go on to have very long careers in television. I mean, he was continuing to write TV up until just 10 years ago. And the same with Michele Soavi. We were watching Italian television a couple of weeks ago, because we've been watching, my son is really into Eurovision, and we've been watching a lot of national selection shows. So we were watching live Italian TV, and this trailer came on for a TV movie, and it was directed by Michele Soavi. I was like, oh, there he is. I just watched the new Blu-ray of Stage Fright not that long ago. So the people like that are still working. We tend to think of them as having these horror careers and then disappearing, but no, they just moved to where the money was, which was basically in television. Yeah, and so that's where they all kind of ended up. But George Eastman, I think I read somewhere that he uses the name George Eastman if he's not particularly proud of the film, but he goes by Luigi Montefiore if it's a proper good film.
I don't know that that's necessary. I mean, maybe that's a good joke, but I don't know if that's necessarily true, because I've seen him credited as one name or the other depending on where the print came from. So
yeah, that's also true. I know because he was in Fellini Satyricon and he used his real name in that one. So yeah, it's kind of more of an arty film. But anyway, in this film, he's so good. He's absolutely terrifying. Like, he's charming, he's handsome, he's funny at times, but he's also absolutely just horrifying, that you could believe any minute if you were in his company. 1 minute you're laughing, the next minute you're dead on the floor.
Yeah,
he
plays an unhinged sociopath very effectively.
Yeah. Yeah, he really does. Speaking of which, his one of his co-criminals,
Blade,
who plays Blade. Oh yeah, because we haven't mentioned it. The character's name is 32 or 32, which is which, because in Italy they use the metric systems. That's 32 centimeters, which is his nickname, because that apparently is how long he is, because he gets it out to show a woman at one point, to show this is where my nickname comes from.
Yes. Which is it's one of those scenes where, well, there are a few of them. There are 2 or 3 scenes in this movie where it becomes very evident that one of the influences on this movie, and we could almost say it. You could almost say it along with me. Is, of course, The Last House on the Left.
House on the Left, yeah.
And it becomes one of those things where you're uncomfortably aware that the film is going to make you uncomfortable. And this is another thing that makes it stick out and be very much at odds with what is typical from Mario Bava. This is not something you associate with him at all. And the fact that we're staring at this movie, and don't get me wrong, it's completely engrossing the entire time, but there are those sequences where you're realizing, where the film is making sure that you as an audience member realize just how unpleasant a couple of these characters are. And it's not just, you don't learn how unpleasant they are just from their ridiculous justifications for the heinous acts that they perpetrate, but you actually watch them humiliate and harass someone on screen who is completely at their mercy. It's uncomfortable. It is cringe inducing.
Yeah. So his friend Blade, who's good with a flick knife, is played by Don Backey, who's actually, his real name is Aldo Capone. He's a singer.
Io sogno e nel mio sogno vedo che non parlerò d'amore, non ne parlerò mai più. Quando siamo alla fine di un amore, soffrirà soltanto cuore, perché l'altro se ne andrà. Ora che sto pensando ai miei domani, son bagnate le mie mani, sono lacrime d'amore.
But I was looking back at his other films that he'd done, and he did some of those Decamerotici films as well, just like probably everybody did in those days. He was in Una Cavalla Tutta Nuda, or the All-Naked Horse, and Le Calde Nozzi del Decameron, which is the Hot Nights of Decameron, and a bunch of other ones.
Well, he apparently had a small role in Satyricon as well. So
he did, but not the same Satyricon, because there were two Satyricons.
Yeah, this
at
is
the
the
same
69
time.
Satyricon. Yeah.
Fellini Satyricon, because Fellini wanted to do Satyricon, but then he found out that this other guy, Gianluigi Polidoro, was already making Satyricon. So that's why he called his Fellini Satyricon, because he couldn't get the rights to just call his film Satyricon. So yeah, he played Uncolpio in that version of Satyricon. But yeah, I read that he became more of an actor and less of a singer, but he's sort of kept his hand in with music. There's only one song that gets sung in this film, and he doesn't sing it, which seems like a missed opportunity.
Yeah, it kind of does.
He's really quite terrifying as well. He's playing unhinged.
Yes.
And somebody who is completely just on the edge very, very well. Yeah, he's really quite frightening. So, I mean, I have to admit, I've never seen Last House on the Left.
Wow, really?
So I'm looking to you for points of comparison with that film.
Okay, well, wow. I was about to suggest that you see it, but I'm not going. I'm actually. Last House on the Left is one of those movies where I've watched it probably 3 or 4 times, maybe 4 or 5 in my lifetime, and honestly, that's more than enough. It's an unpleasant film, and it is. It also has at least one element in it that shouldn't be in the film because it doesn't fit at all. But the things that are taken from it and incorporated into this film really are the scenes of humiliation with the female character. As a matter of fact, there is a specific scene in which a character is made to pee her pants that is referenced quite heavily by a specific scene in this movie.
And I was going to say that our old Blade here, he does look like David Hess. There's got a similar.
This is true.
Similarity with the curly hair, and he's properly scary. Yeah,
and there's an interesting trade back and forth between who's taking the lead on being the most bit of a scumbag. Is it 32 or is it Blade? From scene to scene, it's kind of a toss up as to who's really being the David Hess character to a degree. But when the switch is made in the narrative of the film, and we start to see that Blade, besides being clearly, less stable, I would say. He's also someone who, once he's past a certain point, he starts to his fear factor kind of kicks in, and he starts to feel too nervous to really be comfortable doing certain things. It's really interesting.
But that just makes him more scary because he's still got this knife, and he's stuck it into people far too easily. And there's a whole thing where he starts talking about how he tried to skin somebody once just to see how easy it was, and it's just really quite horrifying. So should we should we talk a little bit about the plot, and then we could just talk about what we know about all the different versions of the film?
Yeah, sure. Let's do it.
So it's quite a simple plot. It's very streamlined. It's basically one location for most of the film. $70,000 in cash is being transferred to the pharmaceutical bank to pay the weekly wages of its staff. A group of thieves known as the Ajaccio Street Gang, which consists of Dottore, or Doc, Bisturi, or Blade, Trentadue, 32, and Faggio. They attack the security guards and then get away with the payroll. And they kill people quite... like this, the film's just starting, and already there are people being stabbed to death.
Yeah, there's a person killed during the theft.
Yeah, because they shoot a guard, they stab a guy to death to get the money off him. Mm-hmm. It's very brutal, very quickly, and then they get away, or they try to get away in their car that's waiting, but one of the police, or is it a security guard, shoots and manages to kill the driver and pierce the petrol tank. So the car quickly runs out of fuel just when they get back into town. They're in Rome somewhere, and so they run into a parking garage, as it says here.
It's one of those underground parking garages.
We call them multi-stories over here.
Mm-hmm.
So they're in the multi-story looking for another vehicle when they get cornered by police. So they end up taking 2 women as hostages. And this bit's horrifying as well, because it almost seems like it's by accident.
I think it was. I think it really was. And then Blade leans into it. He stabs one of the women in the throat, killing her.
Yeah.
And then he doesn't even blink an eye. He just leans into it, and they use the fact that they've killed one of them as a threat to the police to back away.
But he looks quite shocked with himself, like he didn't quite mean to do it.
Yeah.
But then later on in the film, when it just seems like he's a complete psycho, then you just think, oh, well, maybe we can't really trust him either way. Like, maybe it wasn't so much of an accident as we first thought. So they manage to... they take the other woman and get to the car, and they drive out of the multi-story, but then they end up at some traffic lights by a hospital where there is a guy with a child who looks very ill in his car, and they jump into this car with this guy, and he's like, oh, I've got to take my son to the hospital, but they are not having any of it, and they order him at gunpoint to drive, and they're going to tell him where to go. And then that's basically it. We're now in the car with 3 criminals. We haven't really talked much about the Doc, or Dottore. He's the sort of sensible one. He seems like the brains of the operation.
Easily, yeah.
And he's kind of scary, but in different ways. But he seems to at least sort of have his head, properly where it needs to be.
Yeah, he's scary but sensible. He's not a psycho. He's someone who, he's a... My favorite way of thinking about this is there are psychos, but who are criminals, and there are criminals who are psychos. But what you have here is someone like Harvey Keitel's character in Reservoir Dogs. He's not a crazy person, but if you're in his way, he won't hesitate.
No.
And then there are people like Michael Madsen's character who take pleasure in actually killing someone, and those are unfortunately. Apparently the other 2 people he's linked up with to do this robbery.
Now, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I did read somewhere in here how one of the reasons that Lamberto Bava, when he did his edit of this film, he changed the name to Kidnapped, because he thought Rabid Dogs sounded too much like Reservoir Dogs.
Well, I mean, I can see that, yeah.
The film is like it could be a Tarantino film before Tarantino was making films. So
it has that lean, mean aspect to it, and also how not that this was uncommon at the time, but it's a crime film in which everything you learn almost more from the dialogue than you do from the actions of the characters, but the actions are so big that it's the actions that you end up remembering, and everything else just kind of fosters kind of undergirds those actions, and so they build on one another effectively, and it's incredibly effectively done. So
because it's all done in real time, so basically from the robbery to the end of the movie is an hour and a half. And so what that means is that we just get, again, like Tarantino became sort of celebrated for, was people just talking about stuff that's not necessarily part of the plot. They're just talking to each other about things.
Yep.
And everyone's like, oh, this is a breakthrough, even though, the French New Wave films were doing that back in the 60s as well. But here we've got a similar thing, because we're just with these characters in real time. They're not just talking about the robbery or where they're going next, or their dialogue isn't always driving the plot. They're just talking, or they're teasing each other, or like they call this poor woman Maria, they say how she looks like Greta Garbo, and then they're sort of making jokes about Greta Garbo, and I want to be alone, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And they're quite funny. Like in another circumstance, these guys could be quite fun to hang out with. So they're quite complex characters. They're not just straightforward. Like in a lot of Polizioteschi films, you've got bad guys who are just bad guys.
Yeah, these characters are horrible, but they're not ravening. They're not ravening monsters. They've
got more to them, and especially like later on in the film, when sort of things start to deteriorate, and we start to see other sides of their character coming out, and they're really interesting. Now I don't know how much we really want to talk specifically about the plot. I mean, basically they're driving now to an unknown destination. They're driving on the motorway up from Rome towards Florence.
Mm-hmm.
And I was quite pleased when I realised this, because I've driven that road when we did our big epic European road trip about 8 years ago. We drove from Florence to Rome, and it's only about a 4-hour drive. It's not that far really. And there are lots of toll booths that you stop at. That's the thing with driving in Italy. You don't realise that it's going to cost you loads more than you planned for, because of all the tolls. I had a credit card, and I just was like chucking all the tolls on the credit card, and it was quite frightening when I got the bill after the holiday. But yeah, so toll booths are a real thing, and we drove through a lot of those on our trip. But yeah, that's so I don't think they get all the way. They're obviously just heading north, because they've got an escape plan. They've got something ready to, that was what they're heading for. But that's basically it. And then just lots of things happen to them along the way. Things go wrong. There's some really horrible stuff.
Yeah, I mean, at a certain point, poor Maria, who they often refer to just as Greta Garbo, as you say, she asks if she can relieve herself, if they'll just stop so that she can pee beside the road, and she attempts to escape, and Blade and 32 chase her down to a farmhouse that she had spotted, that she obviously hoped that there would be some help there. No one's there. They recapture her.
They beat her up.
Yeah, they kind of slap her around and force her to urinate in front of them. The whole sequence where they force her to take her underwear off is really uncomfortable making.
Yeah.
And soon after that, they're all in agreement that it's probably a good idea to stop someplace along the way and buy sandwiches. I really like the fact that some of the details that are put into the film about this drive are things that would be much more obvious to an Italian, or as possibly a tourist who's driven these roads before, because the moment when they realize it's like, okay, they go through the toll booth and realize that one of the smarter ways that they can avoid detection, or avoid being, because they're listening to news reports on the radio as they go. One of the ways that they can kind of shake off the possibility of being spotted is by just turning around and going back through the toll booth the other way, back toward the city. And the fact that is an idea that Doc is very, very happy with, and as a matter of fact, I think he may be the one that tosses it out, tells you that, they are their plans are to go to a specific spot, but he's very canny in not laying that out, so that the driver, who is of course doing all of this under duress, is by the time you get to the end of the film, he is doped out that we keep going in a specific direction, and I think obviously we're going someplace in specific, and of course by the end of the film you realize that we're going someplace where we have another car stashed. Doc was smart enough to know that they would need to change vehicles, and he had something set up, and this unfortunate hole in the petrol tank kidnap a woman and a guy and this kid is just something that he's having to like throw into the mix to keep things afloat and away from the cops long enough to get to the getaway car. It's wonderful because, like you say, it is a very simple, streamlined story, but there's so much wonderful detail, and it is well told and in often just so suspenseful. The sequence where 32, they've stopped and gotten sandwiches, and one of the things that 32 decided he was going to do is he bought a bottle of scotch and is just slurping it down like a crazy person.
You can't have an Italian film without a bottle of J&B.
So
it's in the contract.
He's slurping this stuff down, and is starting to get a little drunk, and he starts to harass Maria some more, who's of course sitting between him and Blade there in the back seat.
She's traumatized.
Yeah, and once again, it's very uncomfortable, but they're starting to draw the attention of other drivers, and Doc is trying desperately to get them to calm down and not act like this because they're in a car. Everybody that goes by them or is anywhere near them can see if they're acting like morons. And so that's when we get to it. Becomes a question now of like I know that we probably don't want to spoil the ending because as available as this film has been over the past, I don't know, it's been sporadically available over the past 20 years and fairly available over the past, I'd say, 10. There are surprises in the final act that I think we probably are better off not spoiling.
No, I don't want to give anything away really.
Okay.
But
I do love, as I was about to say, I think it's great that the events that happen, the violent acts, let's put it that way, are built brick by brick, piece by piece, step by step as the movie goes along. And it's and there are it's just people not able to control their kind of inner demons and not being aware that the way they're acting out is going to put them in real danger. Even if you're a very dangerous person yourself, that doesn't really matter.
Yeah, and there's some great just extra sort of moments, like when they stop at the service station and they're getting the food, and then the driver, Ricardo, is it Ricardo? That's the actor, isn't it?
I think that's the company.
No, it is his name as well, Ricardo.
Yeah.
Bumps into a friend, and he's got to explain why, like, he's not at work today, and who's this massively tall, handsome man that suddenly he's with, who he's claiming is his friend, but she's never seen before. And you can think, oh no, she's gonna mess things up here. But they get away with it. But then later on, they bump into somebody whose car is broken down, and she basically begs them to give her a lift to town. So they end. She won't take notes. She can't read the signs. Like she cannot read the signals, and she just gets into the car with all these people for a lift to the next town. And just little things like that, like stuff that isn't part of the plot but really just helps to build the tension, because you're thinking, oh no, how's this gonna, just when you think things can't get worse, something else goes wrong or somebody else interferes, and all the while you've got this poor Maria who's just sort of traumatized by what's going on, and these other guys who are all on edge, and there's the tension all the way through is really very intense.
Well, this time through the movie, I have to say, I've always been impressed by the performances in this movie, and but this time around, I have to say I paid special attention to Ricardo. Is it Cucciolo?
Yeah, something like that.
The Italian actor who plays the driver of the car. The car with he's the one with the child who he's trying to get to a hospital, and he. I was not aware until recently of his incredible career as a dubber. He was doing the Italian voiceovers for a lot of actors at this time, while also acting in a lot of films as himself as well.
Yeah.
And he's really, really good in this movie. The moments as things go along and as things become more and more tense, the moments when he raises his voice and starts insisting on certain things, as you can see that he he knows it's a dangerous thing to do, but he can't keep his mouth shut, and he can't control his emotions at certain points. He's very effective in this. It's not that everybody isn't, but he's like I say, I focused on him simply because having learned about his abilities as an actor, providing voice. I mean, I don't know if he provided his own voice for this film.
He did. He's the only actor. We will talk a bit more about that later when we get to the production issues. But yeah, he is the only person doing his own voice.
But regardless, he's so good in this. He's I wouldn't say a standout because the performance levels are very high from everybody. But once you start focusing on him, and let's just say that this, your second time through this movie, you probably will focus on him more.
Yeah.
But the joys of watching
wink, wink.
him, wink, wink. The joys of watching his facial expressions as other things are going down, where he's not, the scenes where he doesn't even have dialogue, where he's just having to react to what other people are saying as he drives. He's really, really good.
Yeah, I like the sort of shifts in balances of power throughout the film, and sort of relationships between the characters change. And I like the way that he's almost starting to sort of team up with the doc, and they're kind of looking at each other and giving each other looks like they both know what's got to happen next. And it's almost like they are now a team against these two lunatics in the back seat.
Because they kind of have to be at certain points. Yeah,
it's very interesting. Yeah. Apparently the film was being shot in English, so everyone was speaking their lines in English, but Riccardo Cucchiola didn't speak English, so he was having to read his lines phonetically, taped on bits of paper to the windscreen or wherever he was looking.
Wow.
That's apparently.
That makes his performance even more impressive.
Yeah, but things when I didn't realise that. I mean, I've watched this film a couple of times, but both times I've watched it in Italian. So I haven't even tried watching it with the English track, but apparently that was the preferred. That was the idea, that this was going to be in English to begin with, anyway. Which I suppose we might as well just talk about what happened to the film.
Yeah. Let's not spoil any more of the developments within the story, and let's talk about how it took 23 years for anybody to see this thing.
So this was a lost movie because the producer, for various reasons that are too long and boring to go into, but basically the producer ran out of money, and Lamberto Bava said this was a very difficult shoot because the producer wasn't coming up with the salaries for the crew. They were supposed to pay them weekly, and it was getting delayed, and then checks were bouncing, so all the way through things were a bit dicey in terms of money anyway. And then at the end, when they'd actually finished the main shoot, the producer basically went bankrupt, I think.
Yeah.
And all the film assets were just seized, including the temp tracks that Stelvio Cipriani had recorded, sort of demo tracks for the score, and a rough cut that had been done. But they hadn't finished shooting. There was still second unit stuff to do. They wanted to show that the car was being chased, because in the final version of the film that we get, there's no sense that the police are after them. They're getting away. But in the original script, the idea was that occasionally we'd see police helicopters and police cars, that there is an element of a chase going on. So they still had these extra bits to film, but it was all seized. And another problem they had there was that none of the dialogue had been recorded live, because this was still standard practice in Italy to shoot silent and then build the soundtrack in post. So they hadn't recorded anything, and so all of a sudden all the film is seized, nobody could get to it, and they tried, and it just never happened, and it became this lost film that Bava was clearly very disappointed, and it was gone. Until, do you know the story? I mean, you must know a bit of it if you bought that DVD. Do you want to pick up 25 years later?
The actress who plays Maria, or Greta Garbo, depending on who's insulting her at that point in time in the film.
Leah Lander.
She led a group of Germans who put together some funding and worked together with Lamberto Bava to raise enough money to get the film elements out of Hawk. And
so the story is that I read that she had the rights to the film because
she had spent some time in court trying to wrangle this.
But also her boyfriend, when she made this movie, one of the reasons she was cast was because her wealthy older boyfriend was one of the investors.
Correct. So she had a foot in this.
She somehow
from the beginning.
inherited from him the rights or something. So she somehow got the rights to the movie, which was why she was then able to sort of pursue it and get it together or something.
So, and that took until the mid to late 90s.
Yeah.
And so she and Lamberto Bava and a few other people put together a version of the film. And of course, for Lamberto Bava, this was something that he was well aware of. I mean, by that time he was almost a co-director working beside his father and had been for a few years. And so at this point, this is another little thing in his father's long dead by this point, but it could be another of those wonderful touchstones showing how talented his father was as a director. Plus, this is something that's just sitting there with no attention whatsoever. And so the idea was that they raised enough money to do a little extra shooting. And what they did essentially is they shot I think a single scene to add to the end of the movie, which I don't think is necessary.
And didn't they shoot a new credit sequence because there was no opening credit sequence? Exactly.
And they were able to put that together and lock down the soundtrack and everything like that, and then they were able to release it.
Now, the soundtrack, you mentioned that. So this is the thing that I've been trying. Nobody's mentioned any details in all the things that I've read about this movie, because obviously, so they managed to get Riccardo Cucchiola back to dub his lines,
right?
But he's the only person. So all the other dialogue in the film. So that means, so the version I watched, I've got the Arrow Blu-ray. I'm trying to work out where all that sound has come from. So was that the soundtrack that was that made in the 90s by Leah Lander? That's the bit I can't work out. I don't know who's doing all the voices, and there's no details anywhere who did all the dubbing.
Yeah, I don't know who all the other voices are.
Yeah.
I really don't. But whoever is involved, like I say, I only ever watched the Italian version with subtitles. Because that seems to be the first version that was put together once they put the movie together in the late 90s. And it seems to me to be the one that, I know they were speaking English, and honestly, sometimes you can easily tell that because that you can watch their mouths and it's perfectly matching the subtitles.
Yeah.
And the which is interesting, but also it's one of those strange. Just as an aside, it's one of those strange things where, the movie was made and takes place in Italy, and yet it's very obvious that everybody's speaking English, and yet I'm watching it in Italian. It's like a snake swallowing its own tail. I don't know what to do first. But the joys of it are that is the only way I've ever watched it. I've not watched an English dub of it, but the people who were involved, like I say, I'm not sure if any of these tracks were laid down back in the day or if they were all done in the 90s. I think they must have all been done in the 90s because of the way that the thing went into receivership, and nobody was able to get their hands on any of this, any of the footage or anything. It's incredibly well done from my perspective. I don't speak Italian, so maybe I'm the wrong person to ask. But I do really like the Italian dub track because it really, emotionally it works. And
it sounds authentic to me. Everything sounds very authentic.
And that's saying something, considering that some of the dubbing I've seen on some movies as of late seem rather haphazard and half-assed. And this does not. So,
but it's weird. So I was trying to work out how many different versions there have been of this film.
Oh, at least 4?
Yeah.
I think there have been 4.
There was an initial one where Leah Lander had worked with this German guy called Peter Blumenstock, and they got a version of the film together, and he shot some extra footage on 16mm.
Yeah.
And they I think he then put it out on DVD with his company. Then Lamberto Bava got involved and put in a load of stock footage of helicopters and police and stuff,
which I think was a mistake. Yeah,
and he got a new score because the one that that original DVD version was, which under the red traffic light title, they used those temp tracks from Stelvio Cipriani, but then Lamberto Bava got Stelvio Cipriani involved, who did a completely new score.
Yeah.
And they re-edited the film, and he chopped bits up a little bit and called it Kidnapped. I thought actually maybe what I'll do here, I'll put in a bit of both scores so we can have a comparison. So
okay.
Here is the Kidnapped score. And then here's some music from the original, which sounds much more like classic Cipriani polizioteschi. So that was different as well with Kidnapped. But then, so this version that I've got on Blu-ray, which is called Rabid Dogs, is some kind of edit that is the closest to his own version. Like they've used Bava's notes, but I'm not entirely sure who's compiled this version. So the Rabid Dogs that's on Blu-ray now, that's got a completely different opening credits that looks exactly like a 70s movie credits.
Uh-huh.
It's not the same credits that was in the Kidnap version. It's not the same credits that was in the original Blumenstock DVD version. So I don't know exactly who made this final version, but it's supposed to be the closest to what Bava intended, apparently. And it's great. You wouldn't know. If you just showed this film to somebody, I don't think they would have any idea that this is a film that wasn't finished and had been edited like 25, 30 years later. It just looks exactly like a movie from the 70s.
It feels period accurate, which is a strange thing to say about a movie that was, shot as a contemporaneous film. I mean, it's not pretending to be some other time period. And to be completed, more than 2 decades later, it's amazing how effective it is. I love the Cipriani music. I think I think it's an astonishing bit of music, and I think that maybe because that's how I first experienced the movie, I just think that it's the best way to go as far as the score is concerned. But
yeah, and it's Cipriani doing his old harpsichord again. He loved that harpsichord. Didn't he?
Yeah. And he's so good. He's so
like
good at
every
finding
film. Oh, there's that harpsichord again.
But he's so good at incorporating it into everything. I mean, in this, he's using a harpsichord, as he often did, to just get your blood pumping, to make you feel like there's just something racing along here that you've got to hang on to, or you're gonna be left behind. It's
very similar to the music for Tentacles, I think, which I think. Is it Tentacles that also has a Cipriani harpsichord?
Oh God,
score?
I haven't. I really can't remember the score from that movie.
and possibly Concord Affair. I think that's also. Whenever I think Cipriani, I just think harpsichord. But anyway, but no, it is good. The music, the original score that he did, I think Tim Lucas says that there were basically 4 or 5 different recordings that he supplied, which were all just versions of that same theme, but done in different arrangements. So I guess if he had have done the proper score, there would have been more.
Probably, yeah.
That just when he got the chance, instead of taking those original tracks and just developing those, he did something completely different. But that was kind of 25 odd years later, I suppose. But anyway, so it's a complicated history for this film, but to actually just watch it, you wouldn't know any of that stuff. It's just really exciting, quite grim, very realistic, sweaty, tense, claustrophobic crime film, basically. I think it's great.
I think that Rabid Dogs is absolutely one of the 5 best movies that Bava ever made, and considering how in high regard I hold his entire run of films, that's saying a lot. It's very different from everything he ever did. It is perfectly aligned with the crime films that were being made in Italy at the time. It is phenomenal. If it had been released, in 74 or 75, I have absolutely no doubt, whether it was financially successful or not, it would have found an audience that lauded it for decades after the fact.
He would probably have ended up making 3 or 4 other Poliziotteschi type films if this one had come
easily, because this changes the way people in the industry would have thought of him, because this is so different from what he is normally thought of as being able to accomplish on screen.
And it's just so unlucky. Yeah, and it's so unlucky for him, because you got to look at Sergio Martino or Umberto Lenzi. They're making Poliziotteschi films at the rate of about 1 a week, and the one time that Bava tries to do it, he ends up with somebody who goes bankrupt, and the whole thing falls apart.
And the shame of it is that he has a drum tight, amazing script. I mean, you're not going to find a better, more taut, more suspenseful, and better directed film than this. He had the best elements, and he put them together brilliantly, and it didn't matter.
Yeah, no, it's such a shame. If he'd have managed to get it produced by somebody else who was making these all the time, it would have been a big hit, I'm sure. But there we go. So speaking of Bava, I wanted to mention, I've already tweeted this out, that there's a new book out about Mario Bava by Leon Hunt, and I know Leon Hunt a little bit. He was the first PhD supervisor that I had for about 2 years. He was a big influence on me in steering my research ideas into something that was actually going to work. And particularly, he turned me towards Italian film, because I had never really been that interested. I know that sounds like sacrilege now from where I'm sitting here.
Well, you don't know what you're going to like until you take a taste.
Well, exactly. He's the person who really pushed me towards Italian cinema, and I'm always been very grateful to him since. So he's just written a book on Mario Bava called The Artisan as Auteur, and it's more of an academic kind of analysis and exploration of Bava's career from a number of different angles. So it's not just a filmography and going through each film. He's sort of approaching Bava's films from a variety of different sort of academic angles. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, then that's definitely worth checking out. Unfortunately, because it's published by an academic press, the hardback, it's out in hardback, and it's very expensive for what is just a normal sized book. But it is available as an ebook, and eventually, hopefully, it'll come out as a paperback. But yeah, definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, thank goodness for the ebook versions of a lot of these kind of books, man.
If you can't get enough about Bava, then it's nice to have a new book that's looking at it from a different point of view. So I haven't started.
Different perspectives on Bava are always welcome. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So I haven't started reading it yet, but I'm looking forward to getting stuck in at some point. But I think that point we should probably wrap it up. Thank you very much again, Rod. It's always fun to talk with somebody who knows a lot more about this stuff than I do.
I don't know that I necessarily know more. It's just that I've lived with it for longer.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, my life would be so different if somebody had introduced me to Video Watchdog. I'm like,
I guess so. Yeah.
I meet people who are British but were aware of Video Watchdog, and I'm like, how? Back in the 90s, how did you find? There was no internet. How did you find out about stuff like that? Like, unless you lived in London.
I had a friend who was a fan of the magazine. He had he was a dear sweet friend of mine who has unfortunately he passed on several years back. But he was one of those people who, in a lot of respects, was an autodidact. He was curious about just about everything in the world, and therefore his house was just stacked with all kinds of interesting things and magazines, books. Back then, of course, VHS tapes, just whatever, because he was just voracious, trying to suck up all this stuff that he could. And I stumbled across, I think it was Video Watchdog issue 9 in his house, and I think he had like one other issue of it. From then on, I was just hooked. I was going to seek that magazine out forever.
I can just imagine you holding that copy up in his house, and as a beam of light hits you through the window. And the kind of Holy Grail. Oh.
Well, at the time, that was only one of many magazines of that type that kind of you could kind of picture in that way with me. Psychotronic magazine was another.
Yeah. I don't know how in the UK anybody ever found out about stuff like that, unless you lived in London and went to like specialist film shops, which only seem to ever exist in London.
Yeah.
I don't know how anybody ever knew that something like that even existed. Because that would have totally changed everything for me if I'd have found that at a younger age.
Pre-internet, it was
late.
Pre-internet, you essentially kind of had to be in either a college town that would have some kind of small kind of squirrely bookstores or video stores or someplace like that, or in a city that had something, and this is pure and simply true at the time, if you were in a city that had a Tower Records, because their magazine section was insane. And that's where I stumbled across so many cult movie magazines. That's where I found Videos for the first time. And it's just, if you want to talk about another magazine that just kind of, took off and ran away, that was one of them, because the in-depth coverage, the tone taken within that magazine. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I was so happy to, over on the NashiCast, to talk to Bob Sargent, the guy who created Videos. It's one of those touchstone magazines for your occult fanatics. And yeah, it only lasted, it lasted a few, less than 10 episodes. I mean, 10 episodes. It lasted less than 10 issues, but
not everything's a podcast, Rod.
Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to get these voices out there still decades later, where these people who made magazines at the time, and those were the ways in which you learned about this stuff. And if you were happy enough and lucky enough to stumble into a Tower Records, you were going to find crazy magazines like this if you were interested. And that's it's a very different world now.
Yeah, well, it was a very different world here as well. That kind of stuff just didn't happen here in the UK, unless maybe everyone else found it and it was just me. I don't know, but
maybe you were oddly sheltered.
Yeah, well, that's probably true. Anyway, I think on that note, we'll leave it there. Thank you again, Rod, and thank you everybody for listening. Do get in touch with us. Let us know your favourite Poliziotteschi films or films you think we should cover coming up. There is actually, in about 2 weeks, I think, Arrow are putting out a Blu-ray box set of Castellari Poliziotteschi films. I know The Heroin Busters is one of those.
Yeah, there are only two films in the set, but yeah, they're both good.
That's quite exciting. So maybe we'll fit that one in at some point. But yeah, so it's good though that attention has been turned once again to these great movies. So, thanks everybody for listening. Please do tell your friends. Share the podcast on social media. Give us a rating and a review wherever you listen.
Yes, please.
All that stuff. Everyone tells you to do that. So, mind you, I never do. When I listen to podcasts, they always say, "Please leave us a review." I don't think I've ever done that except maybe yours. So
you definitely have done it with mine. So yes.
Yeah.
I was about to call you out for lying.
Yeah. I think yours is the only podcast I've ever bothered. But hey, so don't be like me, guys. Be better than me. Okay. Thanks everybody. We'll be back soon. Bye.
Bye everyone.